Hi, and thank you everyone for joining our session today as we share unemployment tips for your nonprofit. We hope you're enjoying your lunch and we hope you didn't have any problems getting that. If you did have any issues with the Uber certificate, please go ahead and write a note in the chat box and we will have someone there to try and support you on that. Today's session is certified for continued credits for both HRCI and SHROOM. To receive the credits, you will need to participate in a super short survey after our time together. The survey will pop up once the program is complete and can be found in a follow-up email that you'll receive later today. Your certificates will follow via email within the next few days. I'd like to introduce myself. I am Heidi Posada and I'm a senior producer here at 501c Services. Just a little bit about our company before we jump into the meat of this presentation. 501c Services works with nearly 60 nonprofits in Hawaii to help them with their unemployment. We also have a subscription-based HR services program to assist you with your ever-challenging HR needs. And as you can see on this slide, we have a nice selection of products and services to fit the many different needs of the nonprofits there in Hawaii. I do also want to say that we will be sending, we are recording this, so we will be able to send a recording of this as well as the notes from our session. So hopefully you can use that as a resource after today. The primary purpose of our session today is to share several tips we believe you should know about the wacky world of unemployment. We know that we will have a better, richer experience if this session is interactive, so we have included some poll questions that hopefully you participate in. And also, please don't hesitate to submit questions in the Q&A box, and we will do our best to answer them as they come up. If we do not get to your question today, we will certainly follow up with you to help answer those questions. In the last 12 months, more than in any recent history, unemployment has been a hot topic, especially there in Hawaii for many reasons. Our goal today is to provide you with updated and relevant information about unemployment and specifically unemployment for nonprofits in Hawaii. Some of you will be familiar with some of the information, and for some of you it may be new. We hope to spark further conversation in your organization about how you manage your unemployment. Okay, joining me today is my colleague Nicole Korn and the CEO of Parents and Children Together, Ryan Kusumoto. Thank you guys both for joining us. Nicole has nearly 20 years of experience handling unemployment issues for hundreds of employers. I don't think many people can say that and have the great knowledge that she has when it comes to unemployment. Here at 501 Services, she helps our nonprofits navigate all of their unemployment issues. So needless to say, this has been a busy 12 months for Nicole. And since August 2014, Ryan has served as the president and CEO for Parents and Children Together, a statewide nonprofit for organization in Hawaii that specializes in domestic violence programs, child abuse programs, sex trafficking programs, and community building programs. So once again, thank you both for joining us. We are going to start today with a very quick poll, just to get an idea. Hopefully you all got your lunches, and the first poll is, what did everyone order for lunch? If you are feasting on something that is not on the list, you can feel free to write it in the chat box. We've got Mexican, American, Asian, maybe a sandwich, maybe other. What is everyone feasting on? And we, unfortunately, I'm in California, so it's way not lunchtime for me. So let's see. Oops. I have lost my video here. It looks like the majority of people are eating a sandwich. Sorry, I've lost my video. I can't see what's going on. It looks like most people are eating a sandwich. Yum, yum. Okay. So another quick poll question for you all. And this one is just, what are you hoping to get out of today's session? It's really important for us, so hopefully that we can address the questions that you are most interested in. So is it a better understanding of the options nonprofits have for managing unemployment? Is it how this past year's high claims will impact unemployment in the future? What can I do about fraudulent claims? Is it just you want to just learn about as much about unemployment, or is it all of the above? So this will really help us, especially as Ryan and Nicole answer questions, to make sure that we're answering the questions that are relevant to all of you. So it looks like a little bit of everything, Ryan and Nicole, so that's good. It looks like they want to know a little bit of everything. Okay, so now I'm gonna hand this over a little bit more to our panelists. I'm gonna start with you, Ryan. Can you share with us just a little bit about who Parents and Children Together is and what your organization experienced over the past year when it comes to COVID and unemployment?
Sure. Thanks, Heidi. And first of all, thank you all for being on this call today. It's a little bit about Parents and Children Together. You may know us as PACT. Every year prior to the pandemic, you may remember us as an organization that sells newspapers out on the street for Keiki Day every year. But we were an organization that started over 50 years ago in Kuhio Park Terrace, which is the largest public housing unit in the state. And we were actually started by the residents who came together and said, we need to do something for the community. Since then, we've grown statewide and provide services, as Heidi mentioned earlier, in early ed, domestic violence, child welfare, mental health, poverty prevention, and community building. I think for us during this pandemic, maybe perhaps our size had a little bit of benefit because we were able to brace for the hits to our work, and we did take some hits. Some of our contracts were reduced, and we had to figure out how to shift and evolve our work almost overnight, like all of you did. And working remotely was a little bit of a challenge, but I think we were really focusing on how do we continue the work that we do in the community to maintain the quality of services for the people that we serve. And so that was something that we wanted to maintain and keep at top of mind for us, and we moved forward with that. With the pandemic, we didn't have to lay anyone off, so we were really fortunate, but we still had some staff who were on call or part-time that had hours reduced. And so because of that, we did have some unemployment claims because of that. But as a reimbursing employer, we also had experienced high level, it's called base claims. And base claims are for claims that were for employees who used to work for us and they went to go work somewhere else. And that for a certain period of time, we're still responsible for a portion of their unemployment costs. So while we didn't lay off any employees, there were some of our previous employees who may have gotten laid off from other organizations that we had some claims for. And so we had to cover those. But I would say just in general that we were very fortunate to have the support of the trust to help us navigate through that, because what we also experienced during the pandemic were just other challenges with staffing because of COVID-19 with regards to staff, keeping folks engaged, making sure our staff's health and well-being were top of mind, and then managing other things like FCRA and those types of leaves. So having the trust to help us really focus on the unemployment piece was super beneficial, so that we could focus on some of the other things that came across to us during this time.
Okay, great. Well, that's fortunate for you and your staff that at least you weren't heavily impacted with layoffs. I know that's not the case for a lot of nonprofits around. We're going to do another quick poll question. Ryan did share some of the issues his organization experienced over the past year, And we're just interested to know how others were impacted, how others on this call were impacted. So did you have to lay off staff? Did you furlough some staff? Did you reduce hours for some staff? Or just kind of some or all of the above? And let's just see kind of where people are falling in on this call. Let's see. Looks like a little bit of, it looks like everyone had a combination of all or the above. So, you know, I know that's pretty common across the board. So, okay, Nicole, can you piggyback on experience of our audience? How well has Hawaii handled the pandemic when it comes to unemployment? Maybe talk about how they've paid claims through the trust and fared with things like fraudulent claims.
Yeah, so Hawaii was definitely hit, especially hard by the pandemic, and we're starting to see some improvement for sure, but they still have the highest unemployment rate in the country. It's actually 3% higher than the national average. And, you know, Hawaii reported that they paid over $1.4 billion in unemployment benefits this past year. And so their trust funds were, you know, understandably depleted. They currently owe the federal government more than $716 million in loans that they've had to take. But I would say the most significant impact to the employers was the fact that, you know, a lot of their unemployed workers were struggling financially due to the, you know, significant delays that occurred with the being able to process the claims in such sheer volumes. But also the rampant number of fraudulent claims was huge. And, you know, every state to some level had challenges with fraudulent claims. That is extremely common during times of peak unemployment activity. You've got sort of these niche fraud rings that really try to take advantage of those chaotic situations. And some states handled it quicker and more efficiently than others. You know, currently Hawaii is reporting that they had about 4.8 million in improper unemployment payments for 2020, but I actually suspect that number is a little bit low. Based on what I've seen and just talking with members and seeing that the sheer volume of claims where there were just errors because of the volume and the fact that they just couldn't manage that and they were trying to get people paid, I suspect that there's probably millions more in errors that maybe haven't even been accounted for yet.
Yeah. Wow. So Ryan, did you have any experience with fraudulent claims at your organization, or were you a lucky one that was able to avoid that?
No, we had a few, and it was, you know, it's when we looked at our list of those who had applied for unemployment, we saw lists of individuals who were still working for us, and so that was obviously a clear red flag because they shouldn't be on that list because they were still employed. But there were so that we worked with the trust to help us fix that with our state unemployment system. But it was interesting because one person in particular, his information one of our employees' information got stolen in some way, and then they used that information to also apply for unemployment claims. And so I think we were the first sort of identifier for that individual to identify that he had some breach in his information, and he had to go and close all sorts of credit cards and other things. So it was really interesting that during this time, as Nicole said, that and we've seen this in the past in other sort of downturns in the economy when unemployment goes up, that you have some really bad actors out there who take advantage of those situations. And it's a really important thing to keep an eye on, because at the end of the day, for us, we end up paying the bill. Someone pays the bill, and it's usually the employer. And so it's important that you stay on top of those things.
Right, absolutely. That's lucky you caught it for that one employer or employee. At least he was able to cancel everything out. Nicole, what should employers do if they learn of any fraudulent claims being filed in the name of an employee? Do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, in order to protect their employer account, they want to absolutely protest the claim. So that's either responding directly to the state agency, or if they have a third-party administrator like the trust or a claims management program, they want to let them know right away so that they can get that claim protested. Because I mean, what we saw during the pandemic is that sometimes the states, there was a disconnect in getting those protests and you know, being able to catch them on the front end. So the quicker you can get that information in, the quicker they can stop the payments. And then also, even if for whatever reason they're not able to catch it up front, at least if you've got the timely protest on record, you then have a way to protest charges should the state charge you an error, right? Because you can show that you've timely filed the protest. The second piece of that is with their impacted employees. You know, if they have an employee who's been impacted by this, they should first advise the employee to go to their particular state, so the state of Hawaii's website, and there will be resources there for that employee to report it to protect themselves. And they should also, well, and it's important to keep in mind, and Ryan kind of touched on this, but imposter claims are actually a form of personal identity theft, right? It doesn't mean that your employer records or something like that have been breached, which a lot of employers were concerned about. But usually it's a personal identity theft. So not only do they want to report it to the state on their unemployment website, but they also want to go to identitytheft.gov, which is actually governed by the Federal Trade Commission. So they want to report it there. And then the third and final step for the employee is to go to their local police station and file a police report. That will help protect them from any other adverse situations outside of unemployment, right? So the first two steps, well, actually the first step is for the unemployment piece, but then the second two steps are just to protect them personally, to make sure they don't have any, you know, anything else kind of come out of that theft situation.
Great. Well, that's some really good information. It's so unfortunate that times like this, there's those people that are out there taking advantage. But it's good that there's things that people can do for it. So Nicole, now might be a good time to talk about some specific pandemic legislation that has been passed to deal with the unemployment system. A lot of people know about what CARES included, and that was passed in 2020. And more recently, the American Rescue Plan. Can you give us some highlights about what employers should know about through these two acts when it comes to unemployment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it can be hard to keep up, right? As legislators, they've been very busy at work. Could you flip to the next slide for me, please? Great. So the first one that was passed, so I just kind of want to give you a timeline so you can see the progression of the various sort of relief acts that have taken place. So the first one was the Families First Coronavirus Aid Act, or act that was passed, or Response Act, there you go, it's on the slide. That was passed very early on in the pandemic, and I'm only going to touch on the pieces that impact you as the employer in unemployment. So what came out of that was the extension, the extended benefits, allowing for those to be federally funded. So as many of you know, traditional benefits are 26 weeks, and then in times of high unemployment, depending on what your unemployment rate is, the state can trigger into something called extended benefits. Typically, extended benefits are going to be financed 50% by the employer and 50% by the federal government. But the Families First Coronavirus Response Act actually allowed for 100% funding of that through the federal government. So that was the first piece of relief that we saw come out. Next slide. So just after that, the CARES Act was passed. And with the CARES Act, there were several pieces of legislation there that were very important to nonprofits specifically. With the CARES Act, the federal government was going to relieve nonprofit employers of 50% of all of their unemployment charges, not just COVID specific, but all unemployment charges through the end of 2020. It also added 13 weeks of additional benefits. So now we've got a third layer in there, right? So we talked about the traditional benefits, which was 26 weeks, and then the federal government added 13 weeks of something called pandemic emergency unemployment compensation, or we refer to it as PEUC. So that was 13 weeks of additional benefits that were going to be 100% covered by the federal government, and that was through the end of 2020 as well. And then the CARES Act also added something called PUA, or Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, which was for those individuals that wouldn't normally monetarily qualify for unemployment. It gave them a way to be able to collect unemployment benefits. So maybe if you had hired someone who was newer to the workforce, and hadn't been working for very long, and therefore were not eligible for standard unemployment benefits, the government was going to allow them to collect benefits, but they were going to pick up the tab for that. So they weren't going to charge the employers, but they were going to allow those individuals who were impacted at no fault of their own to be able to get benefits, which was a great source of relief in 2020. Next slide. So then with that, we had the American Rescue Plan Act. And actually, I'll back up for just a second. Some of the CARES Act pieces were extended through March of this year. So they did a later, it was in one of the earlier stimulus bills. It didn't have I don't remember it having a big fancy name tied to it, but basically what they did is they just took the pieces of the CARES Act and they extended that through March. So then that takes us to the American Rescue Plan Act, which then upped that 50% relief that was in the CARES Act is now going to be 75% through September. So that was fantastic. So nonprofit employers had 50% from mid-March of 2020, all the way through the end of March 2021. And then beginning in April, they will now get 75% relief on all their unemployment charges. This American Rescue Plan Act also, instead of that 13-week sort of federal extension that we talked about earlier, known as PEUC, that actually extended that to 53 weeks. Wow. So if someone were to be unemployed for a very long extended period of time, that would allow them to sort of move from traditional benefits that are now going to be covered at 75%, and then they would move to PEUC, and that would pretty much cover them for the next 53 weeks, and that will be 100% federally funded. And then it also extends the 100% funding of state extended benefits. So it's interesting because there's just so many layers, but you've got 26 weeks of regular, then you've got 53 weeks potentially of PEUC, and then depending on your state's triggers and where you're at in that time frame, depending on when it triggers on, triggers off, there could be potentially another 13 to 20 weeks of state extended benefits, which takes you up to a potential of 99 weeks. The last time we saw that was in the last Great Recession, but all of those subsequent benefits, thankfully, are going to be 100% covered by the federal government. So some good news. And one more thing we can touch on, next slide, is Hawaii actually did some legislation of their own, so outside of the federal government. They did provide or did pass a bill recently, which is set to provide maybe even some additional relief to employers in regards to some of those base period claims that Ryan touched on earlier, which are those claims where they left your company, they went and worked somewhere else, and now you're being hit with some of those charges when you're not the one that laid them off. And we are still waiting maybe on some clarification or application of that bill, but still good news that our legislators are still out there trying to get nonprofit employers some additional relief in these hard times.
Yeah, that's great. I know our company has been very heavily involved with a lot of the lobbying efforts, and it's good to see it coming through for the nonprofits out there. I can't imagine how difficult it must be for them to calculate 50% of this and 75%, but I know it's worth it, and it's great for the nonprofits that are benefiting from all those credits or reductions. So Ryan, can you just tell me a little bit like how your organization directly might have been impacted by some of these? Were you able to utilize any PPP loans, or how this savings, the reduction in claims might have helped you?
Yeah, so well, I would say that we did get a PPP loan, and that really helped us keep people employed. And I made that comment earlier, how we didn't have to lay anybody off. And so the PPP loan actually was a big part of us being able to keep people employed. But what on the flip side of that story, though, we still had the high number of unemployment costs because of those base period claims that I mentioned earlier. And so if I looked at the last year, our costs probably were about $200,000, which we had to pay, dollar for dollar. Nicole just talked about legislation from the feds that provided that 50% relief. So at the end of the day, we had to cover about 100,000 of that. And so that was mainly because of those base period claims. What this bill, when it gets fully interpreted and gets applied to from March 20 to March 21, the Hawaii legislation bill HB 1278, and that was the first actual bill that was signed in this legislative session. What that would do is, for us, it should cover the other 100,000 for us. So essentially, we walk away without having, well, maybe we'll still have a small amount of claims, but the majority of our claims should be covered in that sense. And then moving forward, we have the 75% of all claims with the new American Rescue Act claim. So we definitely benefited from that. I mean, that was just huge for us as a reimbursing unemployment nonprofit. It helped us to stay afloat, because those are the kinds of costs you sort of don't think about. You having to pay for someone who's no longer a part of your organization. But these federal and state solutions really helped us focus on our mission and enabled us to continue our work.
Yeah, that's great. I know they've definitely been a lifeline for a lot of nonprofits, for sure. Nicole, you've made it apparent that Hawaii, like many other states, has struggled with unemployment issues this year. Would you explain the different options? And we've been talking a lot about reimbursing here with Ryan, but can you talk a little bit about the options nonprofits have for managing their unemployment, and some options that give the opportunity to move away from the state's program?
Yeah, sure. So this is going to be a little bit of a lengthy answer, so bear with me. So there are currently two financing options for nonprofits to finance those unemployment benefits. So nonprofit employers can either choose to participate in the state-sponsored tax system, or they can choose to a direct reimbursement option. So let me walk you through the differences, because it's very important. So if you choose to be in the tax system, right, you're going to be considered a merit-rated employer, and you're going to be assigned a tax rate each year. And that rate can change year by year depending on your prior year's charges. And they call this your unemployment experience. And they're going to use that to come up with a ratio each year, and then they're going to apply that ratio to a table that determines your rate. And the states typically are going to use a 3 to 5 year look back period. So one bad year really can affect your rate for many years to come. In addition, there are often, lots of socialized costs and tax assessments that are going to be built into these rates. And the state has many different tables that they use to assign an employer's rate. And each time they increase a table, your rate is going to go up. And so it's very possible that, you might not have had a lot of charges at all one year, but your rate could still go up if the state opts to increase that rate table. The state determines which table to use, depending on economic factors and such. And the reason why the state, passes legislation to move tables around is because they always have to replenish the trust fund, right? So I mentioned earlier that, right now the trust funds are depleted, and, they owe the federal government a lot of money. They've got to get that money back some way, right? And so in a good economy, right, pre-pandemic, the average replacement cost was $1.28. And what that means is that for every dollar you paid into unemployment or paid out in an unemployment benefit to someone, it would cost you about $1.28 to replace that in taxes, because you've always got a refund at a higher rate. And I don't know what the current replacement cost is right now, but I can tell you that during the Great Recession, it got as high as $2.04 for every dollar that was paid in unemployment. So being in the tax system, there really is a very sort of long residual impact, if you will. You may not always see it right away, but they're going to get their money, right, in some way. And just to kind of illustrate how the tax system works, basically, say, you know, your rate for this year is determined to be 5%. Well, the taxable wage base in Hawaii is currently $47,400. And again, that can change year to year. So this means you're going to pay 5% of the first $47,400 that every employee makes. So that's $2,370 that you're going to pay per employee per year, regardless of whether you've had any unemployment charges at all. And so if you have 50 employees, that's $118,500 that you're going to pay into that tax system. And just like any other insurance program, you're going to pay that every year, whether you've had claims or charges, and you don't get the money back, right? Now, there's a second option, and that is to be self-insured. We call it being a reimburser or direct reimbursement. And what that means is that you're going to reimburse the state only for what you actually pay out in unemployment benefits. Now, this can be very advantageous, you know, during times when the economy is very good and claims are very low. But I can see how this might seem like a very risky option, right, given all that's going on right now. But with appropriate, you know, planning, it doesn't have to be. You know, for example, say that, and I'm just hypothetically, say that instead of paying $118,000 to the tax system every year, what if you put that into some sort of a, you know, a liquid savings account or like a trust, right? And you were earning interest or investment earnings on that money. You know, that money is always yours if you need it. It's always your money. You can withdraw it at any time. It doesn't just disappear into a government system and you'll never see it again, right? So, and after some time, you would build up quite a nice nest egg of money, so you'd feel confident if something, hopefully not like this, would ever happen again, you'd have that money there. But if the economy stays good and you don't need to pay it out, then you've got that money and you can use it for other pieces of your business.
Yeah. Well, that was a lot to unpack.
I know, I'm sorry, I told you it was going to be long.
Thank you. Yeah, that was, well, it's a lot of my questions. So thank you. I think that was super thorough. I hope everyone caught the two differences. So we're going to do another quick poll, and just to see if the people on our call know how they are managing their unemployment, if you're paying tax, if you're reimbursing, or another answer we frequently get is, I just don't know. So we're just going to see how our audience is currently doing it. And I believe when well, let's see. Oh, it looks like a good mix. Everyone knows how they're doing it. So a little bit higher paying unemployment over reimbursing, but a good mix. So that's good to know, and good that everybody knows how they're doing it, because especially right now, that's important. So Ryan, your organization, as you mentioned a little bit already, currently reimburses. Can you just talk about how if you're familiar with how that decision was made, maybe internal discussions that were had to make that decision?
Yeah, it's probably a lot along the lines. It was a lot along the lines of what Nicole sort of laid out. You know, when we looked at our situation, we looked at obviously cost and risk, and one thing that was really helpful was the trust or any TPA that you decide to go with. to do a reimbursing, you decide to go with a trust, they'll usually do a pretty good assessment about whether or not it's better to stay in the state plan or to be a part of the trust. So that's also a helpful little piece to give you a little bit more confidence in your decision. But what we looked at was sort of, what were we paying now and what was our claims history? And, we typically look back for a period in time and recognize that our claim history was relatively low with regards to what we were putting into a state plan. And so we felt that we were pretty comfortable moving into a reimbursable arrangement. And so we did. But the other things that maybe are not always highlighted, it's not just, okay, where your money is, it's all the other benefits that we sort of looked at with regarding the trust. The trust layers on some significant support with regards to unemployment and sort of just human resources. And that part was extremely valuable. Essentially we're all sort of in a place where, especially with the pandemic, where there's just an increased demand on human resources in the organization. And, by participating with the trust, we were just given now a whole battery of other resources. One in particular is the fact that we had significant support. We had a backstop of support for managing the claims. So that was extremely helpful, especially when, we're not doing this on a regular basis. You had industry experts who will talk and work with us and work with our state unemployment office to navigate those situations, to look into those fraudulent claims, or to even go back and forth about a claim where we wanted to dispute. That was extremely helpful and valuable to our HR team, number one. The other piece too is there's some other ancillary benefits that are peppered into this, and one being like we have access to HR professionals. The trust makes available an HR resource, so we can call them. For those of you on the call, you might be familiar with like Hawai'i Employers Council, where you can call and ask for support and advice. The trust also has that too, and we have both. So what we like to do is oftentimes leverage those resources and get second opinions, because when we're dealing with an employee-related matter, employee relations matter, sometimes it's good to get multiple perspectives, and it's always helpful to get the trust perspective, because they're talking with organizations, thousands of organizations across the United States, and to have like sort of a multi-organizational perspective, I think has been very helpful to us. And what that really did was, because we had that support in those various areas, it really just allowed us to focus on other strategic matters that were critical for us. And so I think all those things played into our decision-making process of selecting and of being a reimbursable employer.
Okay, that's great. And I'm glad that we're such a valuable resource for y'all too. So Ryan, with all that's going on with the Hawaiian unemployment system and everything you know about paying SUI versus reimbursing, what do you think? Do you think this is a good time for an organization who is currently paying into the state system to consider reimbursing?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think it's always a good time to test this. And like I said, there's you can go to the trust, the 501c trust, and run an assessment. And I think many of you probably have in the past. And it's always good to sort of test that and see what the right model is for you folks. And the other piece too is, while we hope that the pandemic sort of resolves, and we were very fortunate that the federal government came in and applied and provided some support to the state unemployment system, but you just sort of know then in the back that somewhere down the line our rates the state unemployment rates are going to increase. And I think I would say to all of you on the call who are part of the state plans to continue to look at whether this is a good option for you to consider, especially if your experience is low, which they typically are, and then to evaluate your risk and the cost to you, because this is a totally for us it was just one of the best moves we ever made, because not only did it help us financially, but from just a day-to-day support process, it's like we could just not worry about unemployment anymore, because we had someone who had our back on that.
That's great. Thank you, Ryan. So Nicole, let's look at the flip side. If an organization's currently reimbursing and maybe talking about returning to the tax system, what do you think? Do you think this would be a good time? And what would be involved in doing such a change?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I have to say, I could totally understand the temptation, right, to want to return. If you're currently reimbursing and you're thinking about returning to tax, I could see why, right, after a year like 2020.
Right.
And what I'll say is that every, Ryan touched on this, every organization has to make that decision, for themselves and what's best for them. But I think there are some very important things to consider before making such a move, right? So first, I really want to stress that moving back to tax does not immediately eliminate all of the liability, right, tied to your reimbursing account. Hawaii is what's known as a lag state. And actually, I think we have a chart to kind of help illustrate this. And I'll try to explain this as best I can. But what that means is that, you're going to be paying all of your reimbursable charges and it could take up to 18 months, right, for that sort of process to end. And I'll explain why in a second. But in the meantime, you're going to start paying taxes. You're going to be paying taxes and you're going to be paying, some of these, what we would call like residual or lag charges. So let me explain what this chart is trying to illustrate here. So let's just say you switched from reimbursing to tax on January 1st of 2021, okay? So the very far right box with the arrows pointing toward kind of the peachy, beigey colored box. So let's say that's the quarter in which the unemployment claim is filed, right? So you decide to switch on January 1, which some employers did. They switched on January 1, and then maybe on January 15th, they had someone file for unemployment. Well, the way the state establishes the chargeable period for that is they're going to look at the first 4 of the last 5 completed quarters. And wherever those wages were paid, whichever account they were paid to, that's the account, if you will, that's going to be responsible for those benefits. So as you can see here, the box is just to the left of that sort of peachy box there. Yep, that's the base period, right? That's sort of the chargeable period that the state is going to be looking at. And so you can see as we go down the chart that your tax account isn't even starting to really get charged for those benefits until it looks like Q3 of 2021 is the first time, and it's only going to be 25% of those benefits will go to your new tax account, but 75% of those you're still on the hook for dollar for dollar. So there is sort of that lag period there. But I really want to point out that conversely, right, if you switch from tax to reimbursing, this sort of works in your favor for the first 18 months or so, where you're no longer paying taxes, but you're not paying any benefits either, because they're all kind of going against that old tax account, and you've got several quarters there before they start going against your reimbursing account. And then I just want to also mention again that I've previously stated that the state is going to be looking for a path back to solvency. They're going to be. And whether they spread it out over many years, it sounds like they're not doing it right away to kind of give some relief. Originally, the tax schedule was supposed to jump from C all the way to H. And that would have raised the maximum tax rate an entire percentage point, which is a lot when we're talking about taxable payroll. They did cap it at Schedule D for this year, but they're going to be looking for a path to refund that system. And you should potentially be seeing some increases over the next several years, I would say, until the states can get back to a position of having enough money in that fund, be able to pay their loans back, etc. So I would say with all of the, the relief that's coming to nonprofits right now, if you're already reimbursing, I would say hang in there, because you're getting more relief. you don't want to have to still pay all the reimbursable charges and pay taxes, plus pay all the tax hikes that you're going to probably see in the near future. If I had to guess, if I had like a crystal ball, I would say we're going to see some in the future.
Wow. Well, thank you. We're actually at the end of our time. But I do thank you, Nicole, for that answer. And I do want to just take a quick moment to talk a little bit about, I know that both Ryan and Nicole have talked about the services that we offer here at 501c Agencies Trust. I hope that this information has been really helpful for you, your nonprofit. To me, it just illustrates how much there is going on in the unemployment world. And, you know, even at the low unemployment times, there's so much that our HR departments need to know. And 501c Agencies Trust is really here to help nonprofits share knowledge with our members and help take some of the stress of managing unemployment away and hopefully saving our members money at the same time. So Ryan, you've already said so many things about the benefits of being a member of 501c Agencies Trust, but could you give just a really quick testimonial? I feel like you already have, but maybe just a quick one to wrap things up here.
I mean, maybe I would just reiterate what I said earlier. And, you know, in this sort of current environment, running a business, running a not-for-profit just requires all of us to be excellent in almost every aspect of it. And now more than ever, there's never been more of an emphasis on sort of supporting and prioritizing your employees. And being a part of the trust really allows our organization to leverage, you know, the expertise and resources of the trust and maintain our financial health by really giving us industry expertise and service for unemployment, and then allows us to reallocate our human resource efforts to focus on other key strategic initiatives for the organization that can only prove to be helpful for us as we move forward into the future.
Okay, that's great. Thank you both again for your time and all of the knowledge that you've shared with us today. And I just, in closing, just want to remind everyone to complete the post-event survey, especially if you want to get your HRCI or SHROOM credits. But that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you all.